Welcome to the Candida Chronicles with our host, Michael Biamonte, certified clinical nutritionist. In this podcast, Michael will answer your questions and reveal the shocking truth that the cause of most chronic ailments is not what you've been told. The source is Candida, a yeast overgrowth which, when it becomes systemic, can cause all sorts of seemingly unrelated ailments such as chronic fatigue syndrome and even weight gain. For more information on how Michael can help you, please visit healthtruth.com. That's health-truth.com, or phone his office at 212-587-2330. And now, without further ado, Michael Biamonte.
And hello everyone, this is Michael Biamonte, clinical nutritionist. Today's podcast is going to be concerning eczema and candida. Now, for those of you who don't know what eczema is typically described as a type of dermatitis or skin rash, typically of unknown origin, which means they don't know what causes it. And there is one particular type that's called contact dermatitis, which means the person is touching something or in contact with something which is an irritant to the skin or an allergy to the skin and sets off the rash. An interesting note about this is that this is typical with nickel and certain toxic metals. People who have a very acid skin often develop a rash in the area where they wear a watch or a ring or some such thing, because the acidity leaches metals out of the jewelry, which then interact with your own body and your immune system and cause a rash. This is an exception to the rule of what we're discussing today, because we're actually discussing candida and eczema. But I do want to interject that there is this issue of certain metals, particularly nickel, which can cause a contact dermatitis. And that doesn't mean to say that someone who has candida may not have also some metal in their system that is involved with the whole process. That's not something that's ruled out just because you react to metal. But it can be a separate thing. That's the issue, or the thing to keep in mind, is they don't necessarily have to be related, but they could be. Now, this is a subject that's kind of near and dear to me, because as a young child, probably about 7 or 8 years old, I had developed eczema myself and suffered with it until I was a young adult. And interestingly enough, I tried all types of things to get rid of it when I was a young adult. When I was in nutrition school, at certain points, it actually peaked and was at its worst condition. And an interesting thing that I noticed back then is the more I tried to be healthy and eat healthy, sometimes the worse it got, which was really kind of a freaky thing to me. Back then I was doing different types of diets. Particularly, I was trying a vegetarian diet and a vegan diet, and these types of diets in some cases made the condition worse, which made no sense to me at all. I noticed accidentally that when I went on the Atkins diet, the skin condition improved, which I kind of banked that and noted it, but I didn't understand why at the time. It wasn't until one of my teachers told me about candida that I had any clue that this could be what's going on. So when I was told about this, I then went on a program at that type of some antifungals. I was taking caprylic acid and some bowel cleansers, things of this nature, and it made it worse. So I stopped doing them. I didn't understand at that time at all that the condition could get worse due to die-off. I just thought I was doing something that made it worse. So that was my flunk on that. Later on, I happened to do things inadvertently that would superpower my immune system while I was taking some probiotics and yet again taking substances not particularly advertised as antifungals, but as intestinal cleansers, which happened to be antifungals. Now, I didn't know this, but they were. I took them, and because I had been taking enough colon cleansers simultaneously with these products, I didn't get the bad die-off. Later on in years, this is one of the things that gave me the idea of Phase Zero on the Candida program, because one of the jobs of Phase Zero is to absorb and detoxify the die-off that people get. So I bumped into this totally by accident and by trial and error at that time. But I noticed that as I did this bowel cleansing, my eczema would get better. And it wasn't until I fully understood Candida and what Candida was about that I was able to really put a nail in the coffin of my eczema situation. But that doesn't mean that I couldn't still have reactions to things, because there is one overriding issue that one has to consider when you're dealing with eczema that goes even beyond Candida, which is genetics. There are certain genetic errors that people will have that they're born with, which make them more prone to both Candida and skin problems. Interestingly enough, one of the genetic errors is named MMP-1. You can look this up online. MMP-1 genetic error happens to make people more susceptible to Candida because it causes weak collagen and collagen errors in the intestinal tract, which allow the Candida then to adhere to the intestinal tract and allow it to grow. Also, people with the MMP-1 genetic error are more prone to psoriasis and to skin diseases just in general, but particularly psoriasis and eczema. They're more prone. So if unfortunately someone has this genetic error, which I happen to have, you're going to be more prone to Candida and Candida expressing itself as a skin problem. So this explains why one person who has Candida doesn't get eczema, but another person who has Candida does. It's because the Candida, in the case of the person with this particular genetic error, has more of an affinity to affect the skin than it might in someone who does not have this genetic error. This is very interesting, because if you have eczema, in my opinion, you're running a much greater chance that you have the MMP-1 genetic error than if you did not. Another oddity about the MMP-1 genetic error is it makes a person more susceptible to lung cancer. Whether they're a smoker or not, I think there's a 4-time higher incident of lung cancer in people with MMP-1, whether they're smokers or not, than non-MMP-1 people. So while there's lots and lots of literature out there which talks about the studies that link Candida antibodies in the blood with clinical conditions of atopic dermatitis and all types of skin problems, you have to be aware of your genetics, because the genetics are what make you more susceptible. There was a study in Germany once where they found a large amount of Candida in the stool of HIV people suffering with seborrheic dermatitis. And there generally can be 2 types of Candida-related skin problems. The most common is when the Candida overgrows in the intestinal tract or digestive tract. It then releases mycotoxins, which you could think of as yeast toxins, and neurotoxins, which are toxins that affect the nervous system. These are released into your digestive tract, and the skin then reacts in an inflammatory fashion. The toxins are absorbed by the blood and the lymph system. At this point, they enter the general circulation of the body. They cause an entire cascade of inflammatory and allergic reactions, which result in eczema, psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, etc. The person who has that genetic error, as I mentioned before, is going to be more prone. especially if he has the genetic error from both sides of the family. There are various nutrients which are important for the health of the skin and to prevent these skin problems. And normally these nutrients would help to protect you from these widespread allergic reactions, this whole inflammatory allergic cascade that occurs in the Candida eczema person. But unfortunately, these nutrients are not absorbed well in the person with Candida. These would be essential fatty acids, vitamin A, zinc, just to name a few. It's well known that deficiency of vitamin A, zinc, and fatty acids causes all kinds of dry, flaky, inflamed skin. But the person suffering with Candida has difficulty absorbing these nutrients, so it's affecting them both ways. Not only can't they absorb the nutrients that would tend to heal the skin, but they are prone to Candida due to this genetic error. It's funny sometimes when you meet people who have a good amount of knowledge of nutrition, who have this problem, and you'll notice that their skin generally looks really, really good and healthy because they're taking all of these skin-related nutrients. But then you'll see they have these patches of eczema, which looks to be a whole contradictory situation. Here you have their skin that looks very healthy in the areas where they don't have eczema, and yet they'll have patches of eczema, which of course look extremely unhealthy. So naturally everyone would be interested in what is the cure or what is the resolution of this. Well, there are a few things that you would need to discuss with your doctor in order to determine what's happening. The first thing, which is typically overlooked, particularly by health advocate people, because people who are health advocates are correct in assuming everything starts within, but they're also naive in not addressing sometimes the fact that the skin itself can also be infected separately, and you could have two things going on at the same time. Candida grows directly on the skin. I believe it's less common that Candida causes an infection of the skin by directly invading the skin than you have the situation where Candida is in the intestinal tract and causing the inflammation which results in Candida-related eczema. It's important to acknowledge both and to rule out that the person has one or the other or both. But typically there are different forms of yeast which can attack people in the folds of the skin, which is where yeasts like to grow. These yeasts cause rashes because in the folds of the skin it's dark, it's moist, and it's warm, which is the ideal area for the skin to harbor a yeast or a fungus. Babies also develop Candida as diaper rash for this very reason. The penile area is also very common that it affects men that will then develop a type of eczema, particularly in diabetic or uncircumcised men, or in men whose female partners have vaginal candidiasis. They'll easily pick it up and they'll develop symptoms that could travel throughout the entire groin. Candida also can occur in the corner of the mouth, creating cracks and tiny cuts. The lips also, very possible. Again, these corners of the mouth are moist enough so that the Candida can grow there. Nail beds are a common place where Candida will grow. And that's usually a pretty difficult disorder to treat, especially if the person has diabetes or a weakened immune system. Because in this type of Candida, they're only going to be able to manage it and really never get rid of it unless they're able to correct their immune system and the diabetes. There are various drugs that are involved in trying to cure these things, which usually never work because the organisms usually develop a resistance to the drug before the person's even finished the course. And of course, taking the drug doesn't do anything to reestablish your normal flora. People also are commonly given steroids to deal with the situation, which sometimes suppress the immune system enough to knock off the autoimmune reactions that are going on and reduce the inflammation. But of course, in the long run, Candida is stimulated by corticosteroids and steroids in general. It increases its growth. Sometimes gentian violet, which is a purplish herb, can be literally painted on the infected area to kill the yeast, and that's been found to be very effective topically. In the same people who have this yeast growing in the folds or in the genitals, some type of powder is necessary to keep it dry. Sometimes people use a talcum powder with nystatin. That can be effective as long as you don't use it daily and drive the yeast into a nystatin resistance. Moreover, the obvious thing to my patients listening here is they would assume that the true way you're going to get rid of the eczema is going to be to get rid of the Candida. Because in the case where the skin problem is not being caused by a direct infection of the Candida or some other mold or yeast into your skin, the skin is just reacting to the inflammation being produced within the body from the Candida. And eliminating the internal Candida is the only way to handle the problem. This is the frustrating thing when it comes to people who have eczema, is they're constantly looking for the magic cream that they're going to put on their skin to handle the situation. There are some creams that we use and recommend for people that come from South America, from Brazil. These are herbal creams that have herbal antifungals and herbal anti-inflammatories in them. They're useful, they do help. Are they going to cure the condition? No, they're not, because they're not addressing the underlying cause of the condition. Very often, the underlying cause of the condition is leaky gut syndrome. More often than not, you're going to find the person who has bad Candida, especially Candida which is reactive to things that the person eats or drinks, they will have leaky gut. And if they do have it and you find it, you're very lucky because you found a true underlying cause of the condition. It's now a matter of getting the person to stand still long enough to fix it, and then when the flora normalizes after that point, and you have a better grip on the balance of nutrients in the person's body, they'll see a huge improvement in the eczema. The eczema most likely will go away. In order for that to happen, though, you must go through this whole step-by-step process, because if you don't, then it's just not going to handle it, because you're not starting off with the correct foundation leading up to resolving all the factors that are involved in the condition. Easy way to test and see whether or not your skin is being directly infected by an infection is to pour hydrogen peroxide, 3%, onto the skin and see if it bubbles in the areas where you have the eczema. Very typically, people who have bad rashes, when they put hydrogen peroxide on the rash, will see the rash bubble up really vigorously, because you're not only dealing with sometimes the Candida yeast, which is forming the rash, but you're dealing with outside infections like bacteria and different molds that find its way into the skin, into the cracks, and then take up residence there. So the moral of the story is if the condition bubbles under the use of hydrogen peroxide, there is some type of infection there, which is either the root cause or something which is just an adjunctive infection that's making the condition worse, along with the internal Candida condition. The internal Candida condition, of course, needs to be treated with the 5 phases as outlined on our website. Phase 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, to eliminate that Candida infection and then resolve the eczema. It's definitely been observed for quite some time that different products, all which address Candida differently, have a beneficial effect on the eczema. Off the top of my head, I recall seeing references in both medical-related journals and unorthodox ones, like holistic ones, let's say, that talked about the use of oregano oil in managing or curing, so to speak, eczema. Now, oregano oil is a strong antifungal. It's antibacterial. It's also antiparasitic. Certainly is antifungal. It can kill all types of bacteria. So it would be a good single choice if someone wanted to go that route to see if taking something that's an internal antifungal would work. Of course, on the program, we don't recommend anyone try a single product, because the longer you stay on that single product, the more you're apt to allow the infection, whatever it is, to develop a resistance to that medicine that you're taking. So if someone, let's say, wanted to try taking oregano oil for their eczema, I'd recommend that they take the oregano oil for 4 to 7 days and then switch over to something else. Something like lomatium, perhaps, or any type of antifungal, Paldarco, anything, just to be able to pivot off the oregano oil and go on another antifungal to see if there's any improvement. Same thing would hold true with diet. Often, people who have eczema are going to notice that certain foods make the eczema worse. From my experience, people typically recognize that drinking beer makes it worse, particularly those people with Candida. If you have eczema and you drink beer and your eczema gets worse, you can be pretty much guaranteed you have an overgrowth of Candida, and that's the cause of your eczema. There are yeast products which exist that are more referred to as dietary yeast, but these yeast products actually are very anti-Candida, because what they do is they crowd around the Candida, virtually encompassing it and engulfing it and inactivating it. One such product is Saccharomyces boulardii, which is used very often as an immune stimulant. Well, this also has the ability to combat yeast in the intestinal tract and has been used for eczema. Laterosporus bacteria, which is sold under the trade name of Lateroflora, is another substance which has been found to help eczema. By taking it, again, you're killing off your Candida, you're improving your flora. People have argued really whether or not flora, meaning bifidus bacteria or acidophilus, helps eczema. You're going to find some people who swear that taking flora helped their eczema, and you're going to have other people who will swear taking it made it worse. So who's right? Well, turns out both of them were right. The people who took the eczema, rather the acidophilus, let's say, or bifidus, who saw an improvement in their Candida, most likely did not have leaky gut syndrome, and they had a case of Candida which wasn't so advanced, so that the probiotic was able to kind of neutralize the Candida's advancement, slow it down, and bring things down to a dull roar in the intestines. The person who took the bifidus or lactobacillus, who got notably worse, has leaky gut syndrome. They have Candida. So normally it's be totally expected that anyone with Candida and leaky gut, if they took a probiotic, the probiotic would make them worse. Let's just understand that, bookmark that for your own knowledge, because that's a very important concept which frequently gets overlooked. People who take flora, who have Candida, who have these imbalances, typically react allergically to the flora. And that's what makes their ultimate condition worse at that point in time. People who drink soft drinks, anything sugary, notice their eczema gets worse. If They notice their eczema gets worse when they consume carbs. Pretty good guarantee that the eczema is related to Candida if that's the case. Alright, so we're going to be ending off then on this podcast. I think we've given you a pretty good look at what we would expect. The key thing to remember is that you can have Candida, which functions directly on the skin, causing a direct infection of the skin that causes the rash that you have. It's also possible that you don't, and the rash is coming internally due to the internal condition of the person. Putting hydrogen peroxide on the skin usually sorts it out. If it bubbles a lot, it means you have Candida or some infection directly on the skin. If it doesn't bubble that much, the odds are is that's not the case, and the Candida you have is within the body in the intestinal tract that's generating the eczema. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us today, and we will be back on the air Thursday with another case of the Candida Chronicles.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Candida Chronicles featuring Michael Biamonte, certified clinical nutritionist. Michael holds a doctorate of naturopathy and is a New York State certified clinical nutritionist. He is a professional member of the International and American Association of Clinical Nutritionists and of the American College of Nutrition, and he's a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for the Clinical Nutrition Certification Board. For more information on how Michael can help you, please visit healthtruth.com. That's health-truth.com, or phone his office at 212-587-2330.